Hello, welcome to the Daily Present with Johnny Ball. And today, I'm continuing on with the theme of being a guest on podcasts because it can be a really great media strategy for you. If you are a professional speaker, writer, author, there's a writer and author, kind of same thing. If you do coaching, if you are looking to get on more stages or become known for what you do, podcasting could be a really great strategy to help get you out there. So that's what I want to talk about today. I talked about the strategy of doing that on a previous episode. Today, I'm talking about how you can be a good guest on podcasts, how you can actually show up and be a great guest, someone who's going to be memorable, who's going to get yourself asked back onto podcasts again in the future, and those kinds of things. So that's what I'll be talking about after the titles. See you in a moment. Welcome to the Daily Present with Johnny Ball. Monday to Friday, talking about public speaking and presentation skills and the tools of influence and persuasion. Dance along now. Well, welcome to the show. Let's get into it then. How do you be a great podcast guest? Someone who's going to want to be asked back again and again and get yourself more known and stand out from all the other people who are being guests on podcasts. I have three main areas to help you to do this. And so the first one that I would get you to think about is starting with the end in mind. For anything you do, really it's a good idea to have it in your mind already what you want the outcome to be. What do you want the end result of you going on that show to be? So you know your purpose for being on podcasts in the first place, which might just be to add value and to be of service and helpful to people, or it might be that you want to promote your book or your course or your speaking, whatever it is. So have that end in mind. And when you're doing that, you can also be thinking about, well, how do you want to close off? What is the last things you would like to say in the show to leave people with, the things that likely to stick in somebody's head, and make sure that you can make that be memorable for people as well, something that should stay with them. And rather than quoting someone else, it's good to come up with something for yourself. There's going to be, oh, they just quoted that person. Rather, come up with your own thing, something that ideally maybe something that rhymes, that's easy to stay in people's minds. Think about topics that you really most want to discuss on this as well. If you already have a media kit or something like that, then that should be included in your media kit. The main topics that you discuss, any additional or relevant areas that you sometimes like to digress into as well that could be useful or interesting at least, and pick the biggest takeaway that you would like to make sure is emphasized more than anything else. If there's one thing that people remember about you and your appearance on a podcast, think about what you would like that to be and make sure that it has as much impact as possible when you deliver it, and that you put as much memorability to it as you possibly can. Introduce the host to that theme before you even go on to do the recording. Secondly, I would say is to be memorable. Be memorable, because you don't want to just be the same as every other guest that they've had on their show. You want to be someone who stands out in something that we can all benefit from working on. I include myself in this. Remember that less is more. Whilst you're on there to talk, and certainly monosyllabic answers are not going to be ideal, you do not want to talk too much either. Guests who come on podcasts and you feel that maybe you struggle to shut them up, it's like, well, look, there are exceptions to this rule, of course, but some people do just like to talk and are perhaps a little overly verbose, saying in more words than needs to be used to get a point across. So clarity and concision is going to be useful to you, but not too much. You don't want to be curt and abrupt with this as well. Have some personality about it, but don't digress. Don't go on too much about things, and certainly don't dive off the topic. Give the host of the show an opportunity to interact with you as well, and perhaps be ready to step in. Don't make them need to cut you off because they have to move on to another element. Most podcasts are restricted on time. So unless you are Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss and you can talk for hours and hours and people are going to listen to all of that, I recommend keeping your conversations in a set time frame. And that means as a guest that you should be making sure that your host has the opportunity to get all the value that they're hoping to get out of you as a guest on the show. So less is more. Say more with fewer words. That's a good strategy for you in writing, in speech making, but certainly as a podcast guest as well. And I do recommend ask some questions to your host. Don't turn everything around to a question for your host. Now, I have had this with guests in the past where I ask them a question and they ask me a question straight back. And once or twice, that's okay. But when it starts happening every single time, it actually becomes quite annoying for the host, because the host is there to interview you, not the other way around. But it does show that you have some interest in the host and the show and conversation if you do ask a couple of questions. I would say don't just turn the question around on the host before you've answered it. If you want the host to answer the same question, ask them after you've answered it for them, or come up with a unique question, or maybe have some questions prepared that you might like to ask them that are going to be relevant or interesting to their audience. Perhaps something that they may not have ever discussed with their audience before. Again, these are things that will make you stand out. So it's worth doing a bit of research on the person's show that you've been on. Listen to a few of their episodes at least, and see if you can get a sense of the kinds of questions that, if you were given the opportunity, which you will have, that you would like to ask them. Also, I'd say to prepare, make sure you prepare for your appearances. Now, there are some specific things you can do. So I already recommended one of them, which is check out the show. Listen to at least a couple of episodes. Take a look at the kind of guests that they've had on, the themes that they like to discuss. Obviously, this does depend on the kind of show that you are going on. Now, I'm probably really talking about shows that fit my sort of genre of interview style shows that are based on specific topics that you are likely to want to go on and talk about those because they're related to you, either what you do professionally or what you do for fun. You have passions or interests around, etc., and those kinds of shows. So whereas a storytelling podcast or something that is more fiction based or entertainment based may not be quite so important, but it's still a good idea to have a sense of the kind of show that you're going on before. Do a check as well. Make sure, a lot of podcasts now are going out on video as well as just on audio. So it's a really good idea to check that with the host. Is it going to be going out on video as well as audio, or just audio only? If it is going out audio only, I still recommend getting yourself ready as if it were going out on video. The reason for that is that I think we feel better about ourselves, where we feel more polished, and we feel like it's like putting on your uniform. It's an anchor, if you like, to, you've done your hair, ladies done your makeup, some guys as well. You have yourself dressed up and feeling smart like you would do if you knew you were going to be on video. Regardless, you will feel better and you will feel more in your element when you do that. I know it's a bit more effort, but I actively encourage it. Most of these shows now are recorded with at least the host and the guest being able to see each other. So do it for your host as well. Don't turn up in your jammies unless it is that kind of show where you're asked to do that. I recommend that you still dress as you normally would professionally. Think about your image, how you want to be seen, because that's part of how you'll feel and show up as well. Check your equipment as well. And I'm talking about, of course, your audio and video equipment and your lighting. So make sure that you have a good microphone. Even please don't use computer microphone for podcasts and the likes, because they are terrible. Please don't use your mobile phone microphone for podcasts as well. They are not great. They will maybe do the job, but they may be serviceable, but they are not great. So please invest at least 20, 30 euros. You know what? I think for around less than 10 euros or less than £10, I got a clip-on lavalier microphone that I've got two actually. That one is a USB connect, the other is a headphone jack connect. And the difference that makes to audio for just a cheap plug-in microphone that you can clip onto yourself, it looks more professional and it sounds way better than any sort of inbuilt microphones that you can use. So I strongly recommend spend a little bit of money on some kind of microphone. Clip-on microphones are great. Just be aware that they're there, because if you're the kind of person who likes touching your chest a lot, or where you're fiddling with your collar, you're going to be interfering with the microphone and making a lot of noise. So you may have to either train yourself out of that habit, or make sure you have a microphone where it's not going to be interfered with by your hand movements or unconscious gestures. So those are some of the main things, and there are definitely more things as well. I would say for anyone who's doing any kind of guest appearance, and for podcast hosts themselves, please make sure that you plug yourself into your Wi-Fi router and have as strong as possible Ethernet connection. That's going to improve the quality of what you're doing, especially if you're live streaming. I live stream my shows, and so the better the internet quality is from either end, the better that quality is as it goes out live as well, which your audience will appreciate. Better for your sound. And so whilst your guests, your host may give you some clues and indications, a lot won't. A lot of them are just sort of trying to get their shows out there. Doing a podcast is a lot of work. Most hosts are doing it in addition to a million and one other things. So not too many people are out there doing exclusively podcasting. So please remember that, your host, whilst they might be a podcaster, and they do many, many other things, and this is just often a sidebar for them, something they're doing to add extra value, something that takes potentially a lot of extra work for them. And so they may not think of everything. It's not going to be the same as perhaps going to professional media companies, although I speak for myself perhaps and say that I do my very best to be as professional as possible with all of this too, and so should you. So that's really some of my basic guidelines. Undoubtedly there's more I could add in, but this would start turning into an incredibly long video. But hopefully that gives you really all the key points of being a great podcast guest. And if there's one thing that you remember from all of this, is make yourself memorable. Have a phrase that you become known for using, at least one, maybe more, and have a point that you most critically want to make each time you appear. It may be different on some different shows, but always think about that with the end in mind. What is the one thing? If they only remember one thing about you and your appearance, what would you like it to be? And do everything in your power to make sure that they do. That alone, in addition to, if you can add all these other things on as well, but that one thing alone will make you an incredible podcast guest. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you find it helpful. I look forward to seeing you on podcast. If you want to be a guest on my podcast, then get in touch with me. And the best way to apply to be a guest on my show is to connect with me through matchmaker.fm. And that's where you would need to set up a profile for yourself, which you can do for free as a podcast guest. If you have your own podcast, then it's a great place for you to find guests as well. So you may want to be a guest and to find guests, or you may just want to do some guesting. There are other podcasting matchmaking services such as Podbooker or Podmatch, and probably more besides, and Facebook groups and even LinkedIn groups that can help you to connect as a guest to shows that you might want to be on. But do consider giving a good application to them. Do your best and show up professionally. Podcasts are becoming a much, much bigger thing. And now is still an early stage, really, to be getting in on that podcast action and be building up your profile, your brand online. I hope that's been a valuable show for you. I'll look forward to seeing you again on another show very, very soon. See you for the Daily Present, hopefully tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe, and make sure you follow me on social media. Check out my other shows, Speaking of Influence and Points of Change. And wherever you are, have an amazing day. Time to get back to work.